Alright, I might normally talk about the controls, but the game explains as you play. Alright, let's just move on to more fun stuff. Like reloading. You'll automatically reload if you try to fire when you have insufficient ammo for a shot, but you can also do it manually, and you should. Reloading is not instantaneous. Every weapon has a different reload time, but they're roughly the same. The game helpfully displays the progress, but the meter also has a sweet spot. A well-timed button press there will instantly reload the weapon, but if you don't time it right, it'll actually take a little longer. Obviously, this means you only get one try, so it's up to you whether or not you want to take that risk. You can manually bring up the rig anytime you want to check your status, which is nice if you happen to suffer some major head trauma while you play. Kinesis functions as an action button in this game. Open doors, operate switches. Yeah, you get to do that in this game. Open lockers, pick up items, you can pick up objects. Said objects can also be dropped or fired away as improvised weapons. You can even grab enemy projectiles. It's also used for a few other scripted sequences. You cannot use Kinesis to a solid object, such as glass. Power-ups are found throughout the game. They can be at fixed locations within the stages themselves, or they're randomly dropped by enemies upon death. You can carry 4 weapons at a time that you can switch between. If you want to pick up another weapon, you're going to have to exchange them. However, the Rivet Gun is permanently in your inventory. On your first playthrough, you start with no weapons and you pick them up as you go. Your weapons will carry over from one stage to the next, except when the characters change. When you're replaying chapters, you can select a primary weapon. You can choose any weapon that you've obtained. With one exception, weapons can only carry a limited amount of ammo in reserve. Your life bar is depicted by these icons, but it's divided into points, but we don't really need to delve into all that. The length of your life bar can be upgraded. Depending on what hits you determines how much life you lose. If you die, you get returned to the previous checkpoint with the following conditions. It's a little weird. Your life bar will be half filled. Your ammo reverts to what it was at the checkpoint. If you used your revival pack, you won't get it back. But if it's a scripted death, you'll get to keep your revival pack because you didn't actually use it. Also, for the most part, power-ups do not respawn. Some do, but most do not. I know that's a lot to take in, but basically, dying puts you at a disadvantage. All weapons have a primary and secondary fire function, but I'll go into detail later. You don't have to worry about shooting innocent people in this game. You cannot hurt them, and you can't even fire if your crosshairs are on one. This does mean it can be an obstacle if an enemy happens to be in close proximity to one, though. You cannot hurt yourself with your own weapons. However, you can hurt yourself with sympathetic explosions if they're too close. Most enemies have a grappling attack in their repertoire. If they manage to grab you, they'll continuously do damage until you break free. Sometimes enemies attack with projectiles. They can be shot down or grabbed with Kinesis. These boxes hide items. Red canisters will explode if they're shot, thrown, or otherwise sufficiently disturbed. As with other games of the genre, you can kill enemies just simply by shooting them a whole bunch. But there is a more efficient way to go about it here. And it's a little art we call dismembering. Nearly every enemy has specific limbs you can shoot off. Cutting off a limb inflicts a large amount of damage and reduces their combat effectiveness. In some cases, amputating a limb might cause instant death. Different enemies have different limbs. The common ones include, of course, the head. Since the enemies are mostly aliens, shooting off the head typically doesn't have an effect. Most enemies have arms. If you blow one off, well, obviously he can't hit you with it anymore. Losing both arms always kills an enemy. Most enemies have legs as well. Blowing one off relegates them to crawling slowly on the ground towards you. I don't know if blowing off the other leg has any additional effect. Not easy to do when they're already flat on the ground. I will cover the more unique limbs later. You'll occasionally have free look areas, which grant you the ability to freely look around an area. Well, almost. You can't rotate a full 360. There's almost always something to find during these segments. Usually, though, free look only lasts for a limited amount of time. There's only a few times where you have unlimited free look, mostly in the zero gravity areas. At various points in the game, you will have these solder puzzles. For a given definition of puzzle. Gotta hold a line and take it to every node in order. If you stray too far out the line, you lose connection. If that happens, you gotta start from the previous node again. If you hit an obstacle, you'll also lose it. It also hurts you, but the damage is almost nothing. There are 3 types of obstacles. Firewalls just simply cramp your style, giving you less leeway than normal. Then you got flippers that you have to time your way around. They all follow the same pattern. And then there's electric gates which work the same way. These also have the same pattern. If you manage to touch an obstacle 3 times, it'll be destroyed. In some cases, you might be attacked as you do these. Secret rooms can be found throughout the stages. Admittedly, they're not that secret. Just look for the purple. Shoot them and you're granted access. They contain valuable goodies. Sometimes you'll have a choice between two paths to take, specifically left or right, or in the case of zero gravity, two potential points to jump to. Whenever you finish a stage, you are given a rating between 1 to 5 stars. Earning stars does get you upgrades. I'll go more into how it works later. You can replay stages to get higher rankings, but when you raise your ranking, you'll only get the stars you didn't already earn. You'll find this in the first chapter and keep it for the rest of the game. Even if I don't know why Nate, Gabe, and Howell are all carrying them, this lets you do melee slashes. Obviously, it's strictly short range. It can be swung rapidly. Doesn't do much damage, but it can knock enemies back. It's not guaranteed to hit though, so you definitely can't rely on it. It's a last resort, nothing more. You also have to use it to destroy obstacles in your way. You'll also find this in the first chapter and keep it for the rest of the game. This illuminates dark areas to help you see. First, you gotta shake it a bunch to activate it. The light lasts about 30 seconds, but you can charge it while it's in use to keep it going longer. You'll also find this in the first chapter and keep it for the rest of the game. Even if I don't know why everyone else has one, but no sense repeating myself. Stasis will temporarily slow down eligible objects, namely enemies and projectiles, for a limited time at least. Keyword, slow. They don't stop. Stasis objects are still moving. With one exception, bosses are immune. Also used on a couple other obstacles. You can't use it willy-nilly though, it has to recharge, which initially takes approximately 15 seconds. Recharge time can be upgraded. When the charge is full, you can fire it 3 times. Ammo gives you ammo for a specific weapon. Duh! Ammo that is fixed is for either a specific weapon or your primary weapon. Ammo that is dropped is random, but it will be for one of the weapons you're currently carrying. Restores a small portion of life, sometimes dropped by enemies. Restores a larger portion of life, sometimes dropped by enemies. As far as I know, there are no large healths in this game. Revival packs will bring you back with full life if you should perish at the hands of enemies, but only in the cases of standard combat. It will not save you from scripted deaths. They only have fixed locations, except for one that you're given. Upgrades are for specific weapons. They're all one-time pickups. This raises the specified weapon to the next level. There's a total of 4 upgrades per weapon. Your weapons can do more damage, hold more shots, and take less time to charge. Not all these attributes are applicable to all weapons. I don't know if they're even uniformly distributed. This fully recharges your stasis module, but you'll only find it in one location, so yeah. These expand upon the game's backstory in text format, as the name suggests. This gives you a little more story flavor in an audio format. And this expands upon the story in a visual format. For some reason, there's only one in the entire game. Start the game with the Rivet Gun and you'll always have it in your inventory. It starts off weak, but it gets decently powerful with upgrades, to the point where it will amputate most limbs with a single shot. You'll also occasionally use it to do actual riveting. Secondary fire is a more powerful shot, but it requires charging first. This mode also is used for riveting stuff. Doesn't hold that many shots at first, and it still won't even when it's upgraded. Rivet Gun has unlimited ammunition. Bottom line is, it's never the best weapon to use, but it's never the worst either. Plasma Cutter is sort of like the Rivet Gun on steroids. It's very similar, except it's a lot more powerful. It fires a bigger shot. It's capable of chopping off limbs easily, even at low levels. Secondary fire is much the same as normal fire. The only difference is the direction your shots are oriented. In primary fire, it goes horizontally. In secondary fire, it goes vertically. Honestly, it doesn't make much difference. Doesn't hold that many shots, though. And oddly enough, this is the only weapon where your capacity does not increase with each level. It starts off with double the capacity of the Rivet Gun, but when you get to the final level, it's only going to have 1 more shot. Ammo reserve is 48, which is on the low side for weapons in this game. Overall, it's an alright weapon, definitely better than the Rivet Gun, but not exceptionally great either. PSEC pistol is also similar to the previous weapons. It's less powerful and takes multiple shots to take off a limb, but it has a much bigger capacity. Secondary fire is a 3-round burst. If you intend to shoot something 3 times, you might as well use it. And you're probably gonna end up shooting something 3 times. Ammo reserve is 96. Honestly, this weapon sucks. It'll get you through the earlier levels, but it is woefully inadequate for the later ones. In most cases, you'll want to stick to 3-round burst. One saving grace, it's a great weapon for hitting the weak points on a boss. Not the best weapon for the job, but one of the better choices. Alright, the pulse rifle is something a little new. Operates on the same basic principles, except this thing can fire fully automatic. The weapon itself is weak, I'd say probably the same as the PSEC pistol. but your ability to fill a target full of lead will compensate for that. Secondary fire shoots out a circular burst of bullets, but the shot needs to be charged. One burst will take a limb right off, if not outright kill the enemy, assuming most of the bullets actually hit what you're shooting at. Oddly enough, although the game says it fires 10 bullets per burst, it actually depends on what level you are. For each upgrade, it'll fire 1 additional bullet, 11 bullets at level 1, and 14 at level 4. I seriously doubt the extra bullets make any real difference, though. Ammo reserve is 300. Overall, the pulse rifle is a great weapon. This thing will serve you well on the earlier chapters, but it becomes a lot less effective on later stages. But it's always a great weapon against bosses, specifically for hitting their weak points. I recommend not going into a boss fight without one. Also a great weapon for shooting open boxes and stuff. Now the weapons start getting interesting. Flamethrower shoots a continuous stream of napalm. Flames themselves don't do much damage, and they are not capable of dismembering limbs. But it does set enemies on fire for a while, and they'll take additional damage as they burn. Don't let your guard down, though. Enemies on fire can still hit you. Flamethrower does have a finite range, but it does reach pretty far. For the most part, you'll always be able to hit your enemies. However, it's not very good at breaking stuff even at moderate distances. One word of caution, the flames do not reliably make the enemy flinch. If you're continuously firing on the enemy, you should be safe, but it's not guaranteed. Don't just hold down the trigger and fire. Feather the trigger with bursts. You'll get a lot more mileage out of your fuel that way. Secondary fire launches a single fireball. I guess you'd say it's a more condensed attack. Strangely enough, this mode doesn't set enemies on fire. It does more damage, it can take off limbs, it has unlimited range, but it does cost 5 units of ammo per use. To be honest, I don't care for it. Ammo reserve is 300. Flamethrower is a little bit of a paradox. Technically speaking, this weapon isn't really all that great, nor is it especially exciting to use, but it is an easy weapon to use effectively. So basically, how good this weapon really is inversely proportional to how good you are at this game. I'm not saying this is a good weapon to use if you suck, but it is. Now here's a heavy hitter. You remember what I said about the plasma cutter? Well, the line gun is basically the plasma cutter on crack. In primary mode, at least. It fires a wide-ass horizontal beam that cuts through enemies like a hot knife through butter. Man, this thing was made for crowd control. Just one shot can fuck up a whole group of enemies. Secondary fire is totally different. It shoots a ball that detonates in 5 seconds and has a decent blast radius. They do have an arcing trajectory, though, unless you're in zero gravity, in which case they go straight. However, 5 seconds is more than enough time for an enemy to just simply walk out of range. I have no idea how it's possible, but this weapon will actually go right through an enemy. Unfortunately, it doesn't hold many shots. Ammo reserve is 32, which is pretty low. Well, it's certainly an awesome weapon, at least primary fire is. I don't care for the secondary fire. Unfortunately, a lack of ammo really limits how much you're going to be able to use this thing. Arc Welder's an interesting weapon. It can fire a constant stream of electricity, which is also capable of jumping to other nearby enemies. Unfortunately, though, this weapon is not very powerful. Like, at all. At least initially. It gets decent after upgrades. Secondary fire launches a ball of electricity that operates an awful lot like the line gun's alternate fire, except it instantly zaps nearby enemies, but it does cost 5 units of ammo. The weapon itself has a decent capacity, but you're going to be burning through that pretty quickly. Ammo reserve is 120, which actually isn't a lot considering how fast you'll burn through it. So if you are going to use this weapon, use it on groups, because you're going to get the most bang for your buck. I don't particularly care for the arc welder. I'd recommend mostly using the secondary fire, especially before upgrades. Force gun is an interesting weapon. This weapon emits a blast that knocks enemies back, probably amputating limbs in the process. It's a fairly powerful weapon too. Seems to have a wide blast radius, but it is very short range. Secondary fire shoots grenades similar to the line gun's secondary fire, although these detonate faster and probably have a slightly smaller blast radius. Totally worth the trade-off though. They travel in an arc and bounce off walls. Usually. I have no idea how it works. The delay can still be a problem. However, the grenades will detonate if you hit an enemy directly. But I don't particularly care for this mode. It doesn't hold that many shots. Ammo reserve is 48. This weapon's pretty meh. Primary fire is useful for some enemies. It's also completely useless in other areas, like if the enemy's far away. I call this strictly a situational weapon. Contact beam acts as the BFG of this game. One shot from this baby will kill pretty much anything, except for the toughest foes. Oh, I mean they just blow up. Which, by the way, will harm nearby enemies, or at least knock them down. But it has to be charged up first. And the charge time is longer than the Rivet Gun's secondary fire. It's a heavy-hitting weapon, but I hope you got time to use it. But I guess that's what secondary fire is for. Secondary fire is much like the Force Gun's primary fire. I don't really know how it stacks up, but seems to have the same kind of blast radius and range. Well, it's useful if you don't have time to charge a shot. Otherwise, I don't use it. For the same reason I don't use the Force Gun. Not unsurprisingly, it doesn't hold that many shots, and the ammo reserve is pretty paltry at 32. Chalk this one up to your preferences. Charge time is a major turnoff, but if you don't mind charging your shots, well, the results speak for themselves. But I'll tell you this weapon is not good against bosses. Obviously, the charge time is bad when it comes to hitting weak points, and honestly, I'm not even sure if it has an effect if you do hit. Once again, ammo greatly limits how useful this weapon is. The Ripper is quite possibly the most unique weapon of the bunch. It fires a saw blade that hovers in place, and you remote control it by waving it around. For a limited time. Each blade lasts about 9 seconds. Blade makes contact with an enemy, it will continuously damage them. Unfortunately, it has very short range, so the enemy needs to be really close to you. It's also not particularly powerful, and I will also note, it doesn't seem like a particularly reliable weapon either. If you take your finger off the trigger, the blade goes dead. Secondary fire shoots a blade straight ahead, like a normal projectile. The blade is far more damaging here. Ammo capacity is nothing special. Ammo reserve is 48. But what does it matter? Let me just be blunt, this weapon fucking blows. It's the worst weapon in the game. It's not the least fun weapon to use, but it is the worst. You don't even get this thing until Chapter 7. This weapon is really not going to cut it at this stage of the game. The only enemy it reliably works against are the stingers, so I guess if you want to save ammo, use it on them. Okay, I'll say straight up, I've never played the other Dead Space games, so I can't promise that I get all these names right. Crazy humans only appear on the first 2 chapters. They're strictly melee attackers. They can also grapple. Not much in the way of tactics with them. They typically walk or run straight at you. They can move pretty fast when they're running, though. Occasionally they'll sidestep. They seem to do it deliberately to avoid shots. They're not very durable, though. The anatomy report, as you might expect. Humans have a head, arms, and legs. Like normal humans, if you take off the head, they die instantly. They will also die if they lose 2 limbs of any combination. I believe these types are tougher than normal, but not by much. I believe these are called dividers, which I guess is an oblique way of saying they like to slash you, and they'll come at you a number of ways, most alarmingly when they run. That means they're going to jump at you. They can also grapple. Some also have the ability to spit at you. Some will do that exclusively. Others will just do it maybe once or twice. The ones who exclusively spit are always in the distance where they can't reach you. I don't know what the correlation is. Only the ones that are still wearing pants can spit. Although not all pants-wearing dividers are spitters. These guys also like to sidestep. They have head, arms, and legs. Interestingly enough, if you take off the head, they will come swinging at you blindly. But they'll go back to normal after they hit you or you shoot them. You probably don't want to do that. Nothing really special about them. Best way to kill them is to just take their arms off. There's also black versions, which are far more durable. They'll actually survive a contact beam. I'm pretty certain these guys are stingers. They're fast little buggers. They primarily attack with their tail. They have a grapple, which they perform by jumping at you. If you see one stop suddenly, it's probably going to jump at you. They have head, arms, which in this case act as legs, and a tail. Shooting off the head has no effect, which is also the case for most of the other enemies as well. Cutting off the tail instantly kills them. Okay, that was a lucky shot. Normally their tails aren't easy to hit. There is a reliable strategy though. Stasis them. You shoot them once, they should expose their tail, but you can just as easily blow off their arms, slash legs, whatever. You'll also fight black ones that are more durable. These guys have only one attack, and it's a grapple, but that's not their purpose in life. No, their real calling is to seek out nearby human corpses and to transform them into a divider for you to fight. With 1 or 2 exceptions, they will not attack you unless they run out of corpses. If you shoot one when he's in the middle of a job, he'll have to start over. Useful if you want to buy some more time, but you really should make them a priority because they're just going to make more work for you. As far as I know, they don't have any limbs. Oh, you're going to hate these little face-hugger bastards. Their only method of attack is a grapple, but they're always found in groups, they're small, and they like to jump. Fortunately, they're very weak. A single hit from any weapon kills them. Even breaking out of the grapple kills them. Unsurprisingly, they have no limbs. but they are an absolute bitch to hit. It's almost guaranteed one of these guys is going to jump on you. The only reliable weapons are the force gun's primary fire and the contact beam's secondary fire. You could also try explosives. Another flying creature. They spend most of their time flying around and they occasionally come at you, so they're not the greatest threats. They have a simple attack, or they can grapple. They have 2 wings, a tail, and a head. I think cutting off any of them will kill them, but they don't take much damage anyway, so I'm not really sure. They fly slowly and pretty consistently, so they're really not hard to hit. Next up we have this Cat 03 Tails. I'm clever like that. Their primary attack is to launch projectiles with their tails. They'll fire all 3 in succession. They won't necessarily all hit you though. Pretty much one will always miss. They almost exclusively attack in this manner. Between shots they'll move around, and they can even climb on walls and ceilings. For the most part they'll keep their distance. But they do have a grapple that they very seldom use. Breaking out of the grapple will kill them. I don't know if there's any logic that dictates when they do it. Obviously they have 3 tails. Cutting one off reduces their firepower. If you cut off all 3, they're dead. The line gun will easily cut all 3 tails off with one shot, assuming they're in the right position. I'd call them high priority. I guess you'd call these a fat version of the divider. They don't move as fast and they only have melee attacks, but they got a nasty trick up their sleeve. If you shoot one in its very prominent chest, it bursts open and a whole bunch of those facehugger bastards come out. You'll want to avoid that if possible. Stick to amputations. Indiscriminate weaponry has a high chance of bursting the stomach. Contact beam completely vaporizes them along with their progeny. No fuss, no muss. They have head, arms, and legs. I will note that if you blow off the leg, it's a lot harder to hit the belly when they're crawling on the ground. But you might as well just cut off the arms instead. Use your stasis, immobilize them, and take their arms off. I'd call them high priority. And then we've got this fellow, who's well endowed with a massive sack in place of one of his arms. Well, you can't argue it's not their most prominent feature. I mean, it even glows in the dark. So they attack by swinging their massive sack around. If they hit you with it, it blows up. One of the more damaging attacks in the game, but the explosion doesn't discriminate, and it will vaporize its owner. Fortunately for you, their sacks are very volatile. If you shoot them, they'll blow up. You can get some sympathetic explosions out of them. They have head, legs, 1 arm, and 1 very big sack. You can actually cut their sack off if you hit them at the joint, or just get really lucky, which relegates them to melee attacks. This will also leave their sacks lying around, free to be grabbed with Kinesis, and used at your leisure. I wouldn't try going for anything fancy. I would just blow them up. You have no idea how hard this was. Tentacles only appear in Chapter 6, and only in the water-filled areas. They have a melee attack, that's it. But these things do move around a lot, and they'll even move around you. When they duck under the water, they might pop up behind you or even on one of your sides. And unfortunately, the game's not programmed the best, as you can see, because they can appear places they definitely should not. I've seen them flank me on walls before. I wasn't able to hit them, but they could hit me. I had to wait for them to move back into the hallway. Tentacles only have a head. If you cut it off, they're dead, but they're pretty weak anyway. It's a good idea to stasis them. It's a generic tip, but especially true here. Reload whenever you have free time. It takes time to do when you really don't want to get caught out short. Enemies tend to come at you in groups here. Even in the best case scenario, there isn't always time to reload, and you should just switch to another weapon instead. I'd recommend keeping all your weapons topped off. If you don't have enough ammo to perform a secondary fire function, you will reload. Make sure you watch out for that. Trust me, it's easy to forget. It's not exactly a hint, but use your stasis liberally. You've got it, so you might as well use it. Stasis enemies can act as roadblocks. A lot of times if you zap the alien in front, the ones behind him won't be able to reach you. Really useful for the solder sequences. If you've played other games, the natural reaction is to shoot down projectiles. But don't do that. You should always grab and throw them back instead. They all go boom quite nicely. Really no harder than shooting it down in the first place. You can continuously spam the rock saw as a sort of shield. I don't really find it worth the effort considering the fact that it's not guaranteed anyway, but you might. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff to unlock, but most of it's done by the same way. By beating each chapter. That's how you unlock the challenge stages, the bonus comic, which by the way is exclusive to the Wii. It's not on the PS3 version. You unlock weapons for use the first time you pick one up. Hey, you know those star rankings you get for performing well on stages? You're actually rewarded for it. Every 4 stars gets you an upgrade. At 4 stars you get extra life, 8 stars in your stasis upgrades, and so on. The upgrades will alternate. Alright, let's go hit up some trophies. Of course, there's the platinum for getting all the other trophies. We got trophies for beating each stage. We got trophies for beating the game on each difficulty. And yes, you will also get credit for the lower difficulties if you beat the game on a higher one. We got trophies for beating the high scores on each challenge stage. Not much to say, just do what you do to score high on the regular stages. You earn points by doing good stuff, cutting off limbs, killing enemies, perfect reloads, etc. You get a combo bonus the longer you keep it up until you get hit by an enemy. While the basic idea of doing well is the same, the single most important thing here is to go as long as possible without getting hit. And the easiest way to go about that is to use the Flamethrower. The only stage it doesn't work so well on is the maintenance bay, where the enemies are too far away. That one's largely up to you, but I think most people recommend the line gun, or just fall back on the Rivet Gun. This one's a bit tricky. This one's on the 4th chapter. You gotta get yourself really close to death without actually dying. This might not be true on the higher difficulty levels, but on easy, each one of these shots does 1 point of damage. They come in bursts of 4, and there's 20 in total. If you let them all hit you, you'll lose 80 points of damage right there. But they're not all going to hit you, so you're gonna have to throw a little more slack in the asteroids. I think you can expect to lose 70 points. Self-explanatory. Right at the beginning of the 1st chapter, you'll see this crane. Shoot it down. Aim for the link in the cable. In the 2nd chapter, you have to access the secret room. In the 3rd chapter, just go left when you get to the first choice. Okay, this one's chapter 4. When Lexine's getting herself suited up, you just place your cursor right there. Taking your time, McNeil. You don't need to do anything else, you little perv. You get this trophy for beating the boss in chapter 6. This one is for beating the boss of chapter 7. And this one is for the boss of chapter 9. Self-explanatory. Mostly self-explanatory, except for the part that you have to use stasis. Otherwise your accuracy is 0%. Well, you can't really have 100% accuracy if you never actually hit anything, right? More self-explanatory stuff. Okay, this technically belongs in basic mechanics, but there's a pretty good chance you probably didn't actually watch that part and you came straight here. You bastard. So here it is. Simple version is, you get more stars for doing well, obviously. I don't know if the game grades you on every single category, but you don't need to be perfect at anything. The biggest ones are getting all the collectibles, avoiding damage, not dying. Playing on higher difficulties also helps, but it is not required. I don't know if you get a bonus for playing on a higher setting, or if you just simply get more enemies to score points off of. Overall, I would suggest playing on the easier settings because you'll do better, but there were a few chapters I felt it was easier to hit the score threshold on a harder difficulty. Also note that you only have to pick up the weapons. You can reject them if you don't want them. Weapon power-ups can only be obtained once, so on subsequent plays it'll automatically count. Self-explanatory collectible stuff. Although I have no idea why they're awarded for every other chapter. Getting everything can be a pain. If you miss a collectible, you could get yourself killed and return to the previous checkpoint. Hopefully the last checkpoint was before it. Ditto. If you want to know the locations of all the collectibles, just stick around and watch the rest of my videos.